During World War II, Poland suffered the greatest human and material losses of all European countries in relation to the total population and national wealth. Yet 78 years after World War II ended, Poland is yet to see Germany pay over $1.3 trillion in reparations. And now, as the subject is gaining traction on an international stage, I'm joined by my guest, Daniel Kawczyński, British Conservative Party politician, member of the Parliament and chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Poland, to discuss this important subject. Thank you so much for having us today here in Westminster.
Good morning. Pleasure to have you.
So 2 weeks ago, you met with the Polish Foreign Deputy Minister Arkadiusz Mularczyk, who gifted you the copies of the report on the losses suffered by Poland during World War II due to German aggression. You're probably not the first politician in about a year and a half that gets that report. Why do you think now is the time to talk about the reparations, and why?
Well, it was a great honor to host Minister Mularczyk and the Polish ambassador here. We actually presented the 3 volumes that were given to me to the House of Commons Library. And I have written now to all members of Parliament and members of the House of Lords to inform them that this resource is here in the House of Commons, so that if they are interested in understanding the Polish perspective, that they can go to the library. I started to talk to Minister Mularczyk about this issue some 7 years ago, and of course and I'm very proud of the work that he has done and the consistency of this approach. To answer your question specifically, we are the last people who can get war reparations for that generation of Poles who suffered so much. When we are gone, I'm old enough to remember listening to my beloved grandfather in communist Warsaw, what they went through and the terrible suffering, the sheer destruction of everything that took place. But when we are gone, those first-hand recollections will be gone. And the next generation will only know this through the history books. And so I think we are now one of the last generations to be able to try to get this across the finishing line. And I'm very, very proud of the Polish government in its determination to pursue this very, very honorable measure, not for the benefit of ourselves, but for the benefit of those Polish men and women who, gave up everything for their country.
And the next question, a very natural question, would be why we had to wait so long for somebody to finally do something about reparations?
Yes, and it's a very good question. And of course, I think one of the first visitors, the first visitor to Mazowiecki, Premier Mazowiecki's government in Warsaw in 1989, was Helmut Kohl, the late Helmut Kohl. He came just days, I think, after the communist government had fallen. And the whole German narrative has been consistently, don't rock the boat, don't do anything, we'll get you into the European Union, we'll get you into NATO. Carrots have always been dangled in front of the Poles, a combination of carrots, incentives, and threats, and a sort of perception that if the Poles had the temerity to do this, to stand up for previous generations, that somehow their position in the European Union, their position in NATO might be threatened. Well, I think the Polish nation now has the confidence. It's established a functioning democracy, is rapidly becoming one of the fastest economies in Europe. I think it's a question of Polish confidence. I think this generation of Poles who are not tainted or affected by communism, I think there's a resurgence of national Polish pride and, most importantly, confidence. And you need confidence to take on such a Herculean effort, which inevitably it will be, which is to demand and secure war reparations.
One of the arguments of those who claim that Poland should not be seeking reparations because it doesn't have the legal basis based on the decision that was made by the communist-governed Poland in 1953, they state that we should not be seeking reparations. The decision was clearly affected by the decisions coming from Moscow. I wanted to ask you, why do people think that Poland should not be seeking reparations, based on the fact that it was the communist government that was affected by Russia was making those decisions for us? And we still celebrate the fall of the Berlin Wall. We still celebrate the first democratic elections in Poland. And yet a decision that was made in 1953 is somehow legal.
Well, I'm very proud that I have described Bolesław Bierut on the floor of the House of Commons. I referred to Bolesław Bierut as a communist puppet mafia stooge of Moscow with zero legitimacy. Zero accountability to the Polish people. And he represented nobody apart from a small cabal who were prepared to use force and power and coercion of the Soviet Union in order to maintain their grip on controlling communist Poland. So he represented nobody apart from the communists. And so I've said this to the Germans myself. I said, how can you hide behind an illegitimate, illegal agreement signed by somebody who had no authority and also under pressure from Stalin? Stalin did not want Poland to receive large amounts of Western capital, did not want Poland to advance because he wanted an enslaved nation, and so all of this was forced. And if anybody should realize that communists had no legitimacy, it's the Germans. Because NRD, of course, East Germany, was run in the same way. So I'm very disappointed by the German line, and I've had many debates with German politicians as well. Always condescension, a patronizing tone, almost a veiled threat that if the Poles were to do this, that somehow they would lose out financially or economically or from a security perspective. Well, if there's one thing that you and I both know is that Poles do not generally tend to react well to threats. It doesn't work on us. We're not the sort of people that respond kindly to that sort of narrative.
It's interesting that
in fact, it will drive us on.
It's interesting that you mentioned this veiled threat, because right here I have a quote by Thomas Bagger, who is the German ambassador to Poland. And in March 2023, he said for Newsweek, and I quote, "However, you can have a common European future or Versailles-style reparations. You can't have both of those things at once."
But then Poland is, again, that is a completely disingenuous argument, because Poland is not asking for a Versailles-type agreement. We're not seeking to dismember Germany. We're not seeking to cut Germany up into different occupied areas. We're not seeking to cripple the German economy. We are just simply asking for a calculated amount of money to help us to compensate the people who suffered so badly. I met people here, you know, I had the great pride of meeting women who were in the resistance movement in Warsaw, who went through the sewers and the tunnel, the children who went through sewers to deliver food. Members of my family were shot by the Germans for hiding Jews. All of us Poles were affected in one way or another. The fact that Poland has managed to incredibly, in just such a short period of time, rebuild Warsaw does not mean that a huge amount of cost has been, you know, obviously taken into consideration. So Poland deserves this support, and I think what I'm really proud of is that here in the United Kingdom we are trying to convince our own government, now outside of the European Union, unconstrained from those constraints and difficulties that we all had to acquiesce to as members of the European Union. I want my government to be more vocal in understanding the Polish perspective and trying to support Poland publicly. We understand this huge geopolitical strategic importance of Poland, which is rapidly moving towards being one of the most powerful military countries in Europe and one of the most successful economies. But with that partnership also is very important to understand the other person's perspective. No country was destroyed as much as Poland in terms of the human suffering and the losses, the sheer art, the beauty that was taken away or destroyed, all the books, all the great paintings, the heart of our culture was destroyed because they wanted to destroy us. They wanted to eradicate Poles. This territory was going to become Lebensraum for the Germans to occupy and to living space. This was going to be their backyard, and so these Poles had to be exterminated, had to be enslaved, they had to be destroyed, so that there is no sort of backlash. You don't create something like that and just move on and forget about it for the sake of a common European Union friendship. I'm sorry, I just don't buy that. And if we don't do this now, we will never be able to, look our children in the face and say, you know what, a great-grandmother suffered so much, we did everything we could to support her memory and what she did. That's very important for us.
I would like to take a look, obviously we're here in Westminster, the talks between Poland and Germany.
Well, this is one of the reasons why I invited parliamentarians to meet with Mr. Mularczyk. I think that there is a lot of, first of all, there is a lot of goodwill towards Poland. They are hugely, and it's not just because of the 303 Squadron, and it's not just because of the Polish mathematicians and cryptographers that came to Bletchley, and it's not just because of all the Polish soldiers who came to the British 8th Army, who fought in North Africa and Monte Cassino. Yes, there is that historical military link-up between the two countries. But what is very interesting is that today, last year and today, the Poles and Brits are standing shoulder to shoulder again. And whether it's in the Suwałki Gap, whether it's dealing with Lukashenko's crazy policies on the border with Poland, whether it's in our joint approach to Ukraine. And this is a fascinating thing because, of course, Poland is ostensibly in the European Union with its closest partners, theoretically, being Germany and France, fellow EU partners. And of course the narrative has always been we can't collaborate with one another unless we are in an artificial supranational state. And yet, which is the country more than any other that has helped Poland's narrative of supporting Ukraine? The United Kingdom, outside of the European Union. So they said to us, if you leave the European Union, you will abandon us, you will abandon Europe, you will abandon our common security. Nothing could be further from the truth. This key aspect of emotional intelligence is the word interdependence. Interdependence is critical. And I'm so proud that President Putin's ludicrous conduct has now resulted in Finland joining NATO. And Sweden.
Little did he know.
Little did he know. But how counterintuitive, how spectacularly wrong his plans are going. If you had said to me 5 years ago that the Finns were going to join NATO, I would have looked at you in incredulity. They've always maintained their independence and neutrality. And yet now 32 nations, all members of NATO, it's that interdependence which is absolutely vital, because if we show any cracks or any division amongst ourselves, the Russians will just absolutely cross the line and carry on with their outrageous conduct. We've got to support Poland, and we've got to stand by Poland as she takes on a very, very courageous task, which is to say to Berlin, you know what, yes, okay, we're part of the same European Union, we will continue to trade, but you are not going to stop us.
What sort of power do you think the UK has to be able to be a side in the negotiations between Poland and Germany when it comes to war reparations?
Well, I think the most important organization is actually NATO. And we have seen today, I mean, we've seen the very poor response towards the whole situation from the European Union. The European Union doesn't have an army. The European Union can't, guarantee our security. It's NATO which is so important, and not just European countries. But you see, the Poles understand, I think more than anybody else, the strategic importance of the United States of America. And let's not forget, we have a 20 million Polish diaspora around the world, 3/4 of which are in a triangle around the Atlantic, Britain, Canada, and America. You know as well as I do that there are many parts of the United States of America Chicago in particular, where they all speak Polish, and there is huge amounts of Polish diaspora. So what we have to do is, this won't be something that will be done within the confines of the European Union or within the Berlaymont Palace in Brussels. This is something that I think countries that are members of NATO, such as America and Britain, within this defense and security pact that we have, should stand shoulder to shoulder with the Poles, showing them that they understand their perspective and narrative, and supporting them publicly, that they understand why this is being done. See, because you see, what the counter-argument is, and I've heard it millions of times over the last decades, is this is ancient history. This is gone. You are scratching at something which is you should forget about.
Why are you going back?
Why are you trying to rake this up? Why are you trying to upset the Germans? You know, and are we going to be a nation that is constantly frightened of upsetting the Germans? I don't think that should be our narrative. I don't think that should be the priority of our politicians. We're an independent, proud, sovereign nation that is hugely respected around the world, whose people, you know, when Poles come to the United Kingdom, they have the best reputation for any workers, whether they are architects, whether they are bankers, or whether they are nurses, or whatever it is. And speaking as the only Polish-born British Member of Parliament, if I had £1 for every time somebody came up to me and said, can you get us more Polish workers, because they're the most hard-working, they're the most ethical. The Poles have got a very, very, very strong brand. And that is why I think Britain can and should stand by them in this most evocative and emotional and deeply held issue for them, which is all about honour. If you want to understand the Poles, then the question of honour is a very important one. We're very proud of our history. We're very proud of the odds that have always been stacked up against us. God has been very kind to us by giving us a beautiful country, but he's put us in a very difficult neighbourhood, as you know. So
we had to work for it.
we've had to work for it. But it's been instilled in us by our grandfathers and grandmothers, this pride for Ojczyzna, and how, despite all the odds, she has, you know, our national anthem is Poland has not yet lost whilst we are still living. So let's match that expectation by doing the sort of things that are expected when it comes to maintaining and protecting one's honour.
Given that the UK is going to show that support for the Polish claim for reparations, how do you think that is going to affect the relationship between the UK and Germany?
Well, as I said to you when we were getting ready, I mean, I think there are many cases, both in business, both in multinational business, but also in issues to do with international disputes where two countries go to arbitration. And whether it's the International Court of Justice, or whether it's the United Nations, or whether it's a private prosecution, countries can still be in a legal dispute whilst conducting a pragmatic, practical, and professional relationship. And I think that let's wait and see how the Germans react. But if the Poles were doing something spurious or nefarious or trying to undermine somehow the security of NATO or undermine some other aspect of their relationship with the European Union, I could understand a backlash. But they're not. They're doing something which is instinctively part of a promise that has been passed down from generation to generation, which is not to forget the suffering. Why do you think we spend so much time here? We've hosted many times members of Armia Krajowa here in the House of Commons, and we had the privilege of meeting veterans who fought. I mean, I think for me it was the children who suffered the most. And, you know, the brutality of Went. Just to ignore it and just to say, well, for an easy life, we don't really want to upset the Germans, we're just going to forget about that.
It's almost as if you forget about the sacrifices that were made so we can be here now.
I think that would be so counterintuitive in the whole narrative that is being built up, which is being passed from generation to generation. The pride in Poland, the determination to maintain her sovereignty and her independence. 123 years we were wiped off the map. I mean, my beloved grandfather was born in 1903, and, you know, Polish was banned. You weren't allowed to learn Polish in school. They had school books under floorboards, you know, Polish books under floorboards hidden away. They tried to, you know, we talk about ethnic cleansing now in places like Bosnia. People have tried to ethnically cleanse the Poles for generations. And somehow the Poles managed to survive. And they did it through that innate belief in pride, in the nation, in the language. Polacy niegięci I swój język mają. And all of those things are passed down from generation to generation. And so now, as we, the last generation, who sat on our grandfathers' laps and listened to what happened, as we get older and you know, the next generations come along, we are the last to be able to do this. It will move in the next 30, 40 years, it will start to move into the history books. So this is a very, very critical time now. And I applaud Minister Mularczyk, and I applaud the Law and Justice government for what they're doing. Mr. Tusk, of course, and Mr. Sikorski, and other people of that caliber would want you to believe that it is irresponsible of Poland to do this, and that somehow if we do it, we will be destroying our economic, commercial relations with Germany. I think that is completely wrong, and I think it is anti-Polish and against the spirit of our integrity and honor.
We are now experiencing a very difficult time. We are experiencing a war taking place on our continent. If Poland doesn't manage to move forward with the reparations, what message do you think this is going to send when the time comes for Ukraine to claim their reparations?
Oh, that's a brilliant question, and of course that's something that we were discussing with Minister Mularczyk. There is an essential requirement now, whether it's Bosnia, Herzegovina, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Poland, it's essential that we start to understand better and come to terms with the dynamics of what it means for a country to be compensated for an act of aggression from a neighbor. And this is absolutely essential because, of course, if we see what's happening now in Ukraine, and by the way, I've been to Donetsk and Lugansk, and it's the first time I've seen a total destruction on an industrial scale, in the sense that it's not just the buildings that were gone, it's the trees and the hedges and all wildlife. It was a scene from World War I in the trenches, if you remember your history books. Now, what is happening there, and the brutality and the butchery, and worst of all, the targeting of civilians by Putin's forces, we need to come to an understanding of what common ground is there, what mechanisms will be put in place for our continent to empower and facilitate and support countries that have been invaded. Because it's one thing helping them during the moment of crisis. The real help comes also in the reconstruction, but also in making sure that country receives war reparations. Otherwise, any lunatic can take a chance, can't he? And invade.
It shows that there is no accountability. There are no repercussions from your actions.
No repercussions. It's backfired spectacularly in Putin's case, because I think he was told by his security people that Zelensky and the government would flee. The whole thing would collapse, and they would just...
Oh, how wrong they were.
How wrong they were. But they were anticipating getting into Kiev within days or weeks. It's backfired spectacularly. But you see, if they think that they can try it, that the diplomacy, the difficult, painstaking diplomatic procedure isn't working, well, okay, let's just try the military option. Let's see how the military option works. No, there have to be consequences. And I think as our continent evolves, we see wars around the world at the moment, but where we as Europeans, I think, ought to be ready now as modern societies, that we can put into place those constructions where there is a massive disincentive to attack your neighbor because of the ramifications thereof, financial to you, as well as moral and other issues. Yes.
I really hope that this situation is going to show that there is accountability left, and we will be the generation coming from our grandparents and great-grandparents that will be able to tell our kids we've done our best and we've done our work to be in a place and to remember those who gave up their lives to be able for us to be here. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you, and thank you for doing the interview, because I mean, nowadays here in Britain we have so many reports on, which footballer is misbehaving, or all these different sort of, sagas that goes on. This is a really important issue which will affect Polish national pride and generations to come. So I'm very grateful to your television station for actually focusing on what is not always a popular issue amongst certain people, but inspires and galvanizes millions of Poles, not just in Poland, but around the world.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest was Daniel Kawczyński. You were watching TVP World. Stay tuned.